Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you joining us today for this discussion on a follow-up to Curing the Epilepsies conference that happened earlier this year. And what spurred this conversation was really wanting to have an opportunity to bring together all of these leaders who helped make the Curing the Epilepsies meeting happen. And give everyone a chance to engage with the material that took place there, but then also be thinking kind of forward, right? Where do we go from here, and how do we engage each and every one of us as an epilepsy advocate in moving things forward so that we're actually moving towards a cure. So today the conversation is going to be with Vicki Whittemore, Laura Lubbers, Ann Padori, Eric Marsh, who were kind of really the critical leaders in helping bring this meeting to fruition. And then also Eileen Penmiller, Brandy Fearman, and Jada Hecker, who played critical roles in the 2 years leading up to this meeting to helping plan it and executing it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this while I do some quick intros. So for me, this is an issue that I am extremely passionate about as the mother of a child who has intractable epilepsy. And I think what's really exciting is that we're looking at how over the past 20 plus years of coming together as with broad stakeholders focusing on curing the epilepsies. You know, in this last meeting that was held, Curing the Epilepsies 2020, which actually happened in 2021. But it's really, as far as I can tell, I haven't been around for all of them, but this is really an incredibly strategic, inclusive, and comprehensive look at where we are and where we want to go, and really focusing in on the research priorities that would translate into cures and improving health outcomes for those living with epilepsy, and really picking up the pace. And we have to stop and thank Vicki, who had this vision of, in the face of COVID hitting and needing to shift, really looked at opening up with the Ideal Scale platform and calling for transformative change, not just, looking beyond the benchmarking and see what will actually get us on a path to cure. So we're grateful to you, Vicki, for your leadership, both within NINS and outside of it. And I think we all agree, though, that, after 20 years of working towards curing the epilepsies, there's still a ton of work to do. And there are still a lot of quality of life issues for those who are living with epilepsy. But I think that the Curing the Epilepsies meeting and the broad working group that came together to help plan and execute is a model for what we need to do moving forward, right? If anybody read the editorial, there were two editorials that came out of Curing the Epilepsies, one from the point of view of the PAGs, the patient advocacy groups, and those who were sitting on that side of the fence, really in their editorial were saying, we've got to come together and develop this national plan, a national strategy to focus on improving epilepsy outcomes as rapidly as possible, really looking to shift the curve. And I think that those groups working alongside and with, the government agencies and these large groups represents the coming together that we need to see and continue, really with the key takeaway being that we have to work together with a shared urgency and a shared voice if we are going to actually see a real shift in the pace. And we've seen that with other groups, right? Well, the COVID crisis, people coming together, how quickly things moved, the pediatric cancers, we've seen it, Parkinson's, SMA, all of these groups have that shared voice and shared urgency together. So today, really what we're looking to do is share some ideas, and really we want to be hearing from you throughout. Feel free to actively use the Q&A or the chat function to share what's coming up for you when you're hearing what we're saying. We want to expand the understanding of how critical our interdependence is if we're going to make progress, right? It's only can really happen if we come together and then work with all of you on an ongoing basis to lay the groundwork. You know, there are early efforts underway, looking at building a national plan. And so I think what we ask of folks is to think about your value add and what you can bring to the table in this fight against epilepsy. So that being said, I'm going to quickly do intros to for our guests, and then we're going to jump in. So I think everybody on the call probably knows these people, because if you're in the epilepsy space, these are our superstars, right? The big hitters. So we've got Dr. Vicki Whittemore, who is program director at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke in the Division of Neuroscience. She oversees a grant portfolio that includes basic, translational, and clinical studies in epilepsy. Has done a lot of work in SUDEP, genetic epilepsies, and basically is an ally for us in every sense of the word, within government agencies and beyond. We have Dr. Ann Podori, who is a clinician scientist at Boston Children's Hospital, who's focused on understanding the genetic causes of human epilepsy. She's a pediatric neurologist and director of the programs in neurogenetics and epilepsy genetics at BCH. And we have Eric Marsh, who is also an attending physician, but at CHOP, and his research really focuses on understanding how changes in the brain development lead to epilepsy, and looks at that from a lot of different lenses. We have Laura Lubbers, who's the Chief Scientific Officer at Cure Epilepsy, who brings decades of research and experience from a number of different perspectives, both as a family member of someone who struggled with epilepsy, but also from the drug development side, and has been a critical leader in pushing forward the understanding of epilepsy. We've got Brandy Fearman, who has served as the Vice President of Research and New Therapies at the Epilepsy Foundation since 2016. And she oversees all Epilepsy Foundation research programs and priorities for innovation, engagement, and research training. Got her hands in a lot of pots. We love working with her. And we've got Eileen Penn-Miller, who is a lawyer by training, but serves as the director for the Rare Epilepsy Network right now, with, I believe, 75 plus rare epilepsy organizations that are working together to improve outcomes for patients through collaboration. And has a long history in the epilepsy space. And we have Jayetta Hecker, who has a career in policy analysis and looking at how to solve difficult problems. So we always are thrilled to have her with us to share her big thinking and perspective. With that, I'm out of breath, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Vicki, to kick us off.
Thanks, Gabby, and thanks everyone for joining us here tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone.
All right.
Waiting for my slides to come up here.
Sorry, Vicki. Got a little bit of a technical issue there.
Want me to try to share my screen?
Yeah, go for it. Something seems to be happening here. Sorry, folks. There we go, Vicki. All right, Vicki, you're good to go.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to remind everyone that the most recent conference that took place in 2021 was actually the fourth in a series. The first conference was held in 2000, and then held after that every about 7 years. And we're pleased to announce that the next conference will be not in 7 years, but in 2026. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And what the links are here under each of the conferences are the links to the benchmarks. So the benchmarks, for those who aren't aware of this, were really an idea that came from the community, from especially Dan Lowenstein and others, to really put some benchmarks in place so we could identify what research was needed. And we had a way to really look at progress. Were we making progress, meeting any of these benchmarks as we progressed through the years? So also, as many of you probably know, the conference that was supposed to take place as a face-to-face conference at NIH in April 2020, but because of the pandemic, we postponed it, being hopeful that it would still be face-to-face, which did not occur. So it was a virtual meeting that we held. But that additional time actually gave us the space to utilize a crowdsourcing tool called IdeaScale to start a conversation with the community, asking for ideas for transformative research priorities. What were areas of epilepsy research that could really accelerate research, move the field forward, not just in little incremental ways, but in really big advances. And because we had really finalized the benchmarks, which were to be the topic of the meeting and the agenda in April, we completely changed the agenda to really focus the discussion on the transformative research priorities. So at the conference itself, each session was attended by between 300 and 500 participants. And the virtual platform really did allow for participation by individuals who otherwise might not have attended and traveled to NIH for the conference, which was really wonderful. We had some breakout sessions during the meeting that turned out to be actually quite fantastic, because we randomly assigned people to the breakout rooms. So what that meant was that we put people together who sometimes had never met each other. There were more established investigators, junior investigators, advocates, individuals from the federal agencies who kind of got thrown together in these breakout rooms. But the discussions, I think, were really quite fruitful and interesting. And I know for a fact that some of those conversations have led to new collaborations and to people finding new positions in new labs also. We were approached before the conference by a group of young investigators who asked if they could find a time to meet, and they actually organized a meeting that took place with just the young investigators immediately after the conference. So what are the outcomes? Well, the Young Investigator Group continues to meet. The meetings are organized by a group of young investigators and coordinated by the American Epilepsy Society, which has been really fantastic and has offered a way for them to continue to network. As I said, the conference will be held every 5 years going forward. We feel as if 7 years is just too long of a period of time in between. And we're hopeful that there'll be some activities that will take place in the intervening 4 years between the conferences. There will be some changes to the charter of the American Epilepsy Society Epilepsy Research Benchmarks Committee to provide the ability to do some more forward-looking activities, as well as to continue to provide the progress reports and the progress toward meeting the epilepsy research benchmarks, which the committee has done in the past. And to speak specifically about NINDS follow-up after the conference, we've continued to have numerous discussions about the gaps and opportunities and the research priorities that were identified at the conference. And we've really focused over the course of the last few months on analysis of NIH support for translational research on the epilepsies. And so what does this mean? Well, what we've been looking at is what are the challenges, barriers, and opportunities for research to move from a base science finding or basic research, so a finding that happens in an animal model in a research lab. What are the barriers to moving that into more clinically relevant or translational research? And then what are the barriers for the next step? Moving that translational research where you're identifying a drug target, you're finding a drug that targets one of the genes that we know is involved in epilepsy. So what is this? What are the barriers to move from that step into clinical research and clinical trials? And then the last step that really it falls outside of NIH, but is critically important in all of this, is then how do you move from the findings of that clinical research to clinical implementation? How do you push that new finding, that new treatment into clinical implementation throughout the country for individuals with epilepsy? And my colleagues, Chris, do the analysis. Actually, they've been doing the analysis for us. So this is just a preliminary look at some of the analysis we've been doing. So just quickly, and that will provide more of a full report when this analysis is really complete. But if you look at this graph, epilepsy research is going to basic research, and that's continuing to increase. If you look at the blue line, that's translational funding for translational research. That's increasing also, but not as significantly as the basic research. Clinical research, meaning clinical studies using human study participants, is staying about the same, and as is clinical trials, with about 1 clinical trial in the epilepsies per year. Another way we're looking at the analysis is to look at, and this is really cool analysis and more of this to come, but what this analysis shows you is if you look at the top blue bars, those are the basic grants on basic research and the investigators who are doing research on basic research. The gray lines that cross from, say, blue over to the yellow bars, or blue to the red, or blue down to green, those are investigators that are moving from doing basic science research to doing clinical research or basic to translational research. And what you can see from this, and again, more information about this coming, is that a large number of epilepsy researchers who do basic research stay in basic research. And there are a few individuals who very much transition between basic, clinical, translational. And so our next step, as we finish analyzing this data, is also to begin having some one-on-one interviews as well as some focus groups to really talk to individuals about what has made them successful in being able to translate their research. What challenges did they face that they were able to overcome? And for other individuals who stay in basic research, even if they had a translational finding, why didn't they move that forward? What are those significant barriers and challenges that we at NIH can help to put new initiatives or new resources in place that will help to really accelerate the research so that we can move that research from basic to translational to clinical implementation as rapidly as possible. So with that, I will stop and thank you. And after this, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. This is my email address. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Vicki. There's a lot of exciting stuff that you just shared. Every 5 years, that's amazing. That's a fantastic shift. So we can keep this conversation going more readily. And we appreciate that. Thank you for advocating for all that you do. All right, Anne, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is really fun to get together. We haven't had a group discussion with all of these people together, I think, since before the benchmarks meeting. And I just wanted to riff off of what Vicki's gone over in terms of what the value of the benchmarks and the benchmarks committee has meant to the community. And I'm speaking, for myself as part of the research community, but also speaking about the community at large, clinical research, translational community ELC and NINDS partnering. And I say that because what I felt very strongly was that we had wonderful discussions, and we had a lot of discussion about what we had done and what had been accomplished, but mostly a discussion about what was still to be accomplished and moving forward. That what we really valued was the coming together, both as Gabby mentioned and as Vicky mentioned. And one strong piece of evidence about how valuable that was the call from many parties to do this more frequently, that we should gather more frequently. So I want to first thank Vicky and NINDS for sort of acknowledging that, and the American Epilepsy Society for continuing to foster the partnership with NINDS to be able to do this. And I'm thrilled that the next set of dots will be only a couple of dots, and it'll be 5 years that we use as our next interval. And what have we really done together, and what have we learned? Was not just a reflection of what have we done in the past and how great we're doing, but really that there's been some good progress. There's been some strong progress in basic science, and some really nice examples from the tuberous sclerosis complex field, from SCN1A, going from gene to understanding a syndrome to being able to then go all the way to gene-based therapy, which if we talked about 5 years ago, I think a lot of us would have said, it wouldn't happen. And here we are in the midst of a trial. And I think what I'd like to capture was some of the energy that was certainly positive and laudatory about all of those efforts and those successes, but I think a lot of you, and I see SCN2A and 8A and 15q dupe and SLC13A5 and a lot of groups represented here. And I think if I might sort of channel the energy that we have here and the energy we had at the conference, why are these examples, these great examples, why are they the exception, and why can't they be the rule? And how can we as a group make them the rule? So, with that, we talked quite a lot about strategies to move the field forward. Vicky talked about some of the transformative ideas, calls that we had, and I think we felt that there was a lot of discussion about strategy more than transformative ideas. So I thought I'd cover again some of those things. And one was that we needed to have a culture change to really promote partnerships. So what do I mean by that? We have scientists, we have clinicians, we have people who are clinician scientists who do both, who might do clinical research along with the clinic or bench research along with the clinic. We have advocacy partners, we have industry, we have a lot of companies interested in a lot of different epilepsies and neurodevelopmental disorders. And yet there are barriers to promoting these partnerships. And so I'll speak from my perspective as a clinician scientist. There are barriers that I see are young trainees facing in terms of time, the time it takes to train to become an epileptologist, and then on top of that to remain at a junior faculty level to do a postdoctoral fellowship and finally become a physician scientist who might have an independent research position. And so, we're doing a lot of things to try to promote that. And NINDS has had a lot of initiatives to get them people who are really motivated to do clinically oriented and patient question-centered work into training programs early. So those are things that are really positive. But we have a workforce issue. The SCN1A community and the TSC communities have been working for 2 decades or more to really figure out what are the basic questions, the basic brain abnormalities leading to the epilepsy, leading to the cognitive issues, leading to the autism and the other many conditions that go along with epilepsy. And that's taken a lot of labs and a lot of people and a more recent coming together. How can we accelerate those processes? And one way is to make it attractive for people to pursue these careers doing that. And then the other is that we need to partner. And I think we've seen a real revolution in terms of how we as clinician scientists are able to have access to ELC, to have access to advocacy partners, and to truly partner, to host conferences together, to have think tank sessions together, and to bring the patient voice to the research to continue to motivate the research, which is wonderful for the research today, but it really also motivates our trainees very powerfully, whether they're MDs or PhDs and PHs or various levels of training. So I think the work that's being done by the ELC and by all of the groups here is not only to raise money for funds and to really promote the message that we need to do better to get a cure, but to really inspire the next generation. When you bring your stories and you bring your urgency to the table, it really does motivate the folks who are in the lab doing the work that needs to be done. And then finally, I'll speak from my academic vantage point. We have to do some work at our local institutions in terms of reaching out to other fields. Let's look at what cancer has done, is what a lot of us will say. Well, what does that really mean? And how do we really sort of take what we might want to model from their methods of going from molecules to systems to then drugs and trials, and how do we accelerate in the same way for the field of epilepsy. In terms of other things that we talked about at the conference that I think still remain quite real, research infrastructure, we each have our own little place that we keep our data. How can we open the doors up and share that? I think in the genomics world, we're slowly getting better at that. NINDS has created a db-GAP. So NIH has a db-GAP data sharing platform. That's one way to start, but I think across different institutions often with federal funding, we've been able to create shared platforms so that my genotypes can talk to Eric Marsh's genotypes at Penn because we've got a shared platform with a few other hospitals, and the hope is to grow that, out to many different centers so we can actually not just make an exception to share data because, oh, I trust that person, that'll be fine, but to really make it the rule that our data that are derived from our patients really are there in a safe way, in a secure way, and in a HIPAA compliant way, are still there to be able to serve the bigger questions of what's causing the seizures, what are the abnormalities that we can find that are common across different groups of people, and how do we prioritize which bench projects should happen and which clinical trials should happen. I mentioned training before, and I think we really do need to shine a spotlight and get a research focus on the epilepsies and a research mindset in our clinical training. So I have the luxury of interviewing applicants to our residency program and also to do some early career advising along with my chair. And what we see is people who are coming sort of often looking for shovel-ready projects and also sort of looking for some directions. I love child neurology. We see a lot of epilepsy. What can I do? So it's really on us who are a little further along in our careers to say, look, here's a project you can do. Let's get you excited about this. And you can find one of the many, many things that there is to do that's a question that a trainee can tackle and get in front of patients and see what the real life of patients is like by talking to families and really understanding the clinical condition, and then doing even a small short research project while they're just getting into their training. That can inspire them then when they're coming back to the bench or they're going and doing a clinical research project to make epilepsy their focus. So that's something that people like myself and Eric can do, but also something that, again, is very much encouraged by some of the federal training grants that are available. So one thing that we really have to do is continue to reward that by getting these folks in early and exciting them, but also reward them by having them be part of the community. So initiatives like the Young Investigators groups and things like that can really expose and cultivate the next generation and a bigger generation of clinician scientists, I think should be high on our list. And then finally, translation. We talked about this a lot, particularly in the last session of the Curing the Epilepsies conference. A lot of great ideas and a lot of great science happening. How do we get it to the patients? So if I turned around in my office here, I've got a long list of code numbers, and these are patient numbers where we actually found something, and we still have 10 steps before we can actually translate the findings back to the very patients who gave us their blood to take the DNA. That was sort of yesterday's MO. Today at our institution, we've actually partnered with an institutional platform that is essentially allowing us to do genetic sequencing, allowing us to do our research analysis, and then do a quick confirmation for anybody with unsolved epilepsy, particularly for people who've not been able to get clinical testing approved. So that shouldn't be a big deal. We should, yes, we're celebrating because we've done over 500 enrollments and we've gotten 100 new diagnoses that we've been able to hand back to patients. That's great, but we should have been doing that 10 years ago when we had the technology. And so now we're moving on to genomes. How do we get this to move faster? How do we really translate this knowledge burst that we've had in genomics and neurogenetics to get to the patients more quickly so they can really move towards a path to precision medicine? So I'll stop there, but I'll just say again how much I appreciate everybody coming together again. And I think your drive and excitement is really driving us forward and allowing us to come together both in the clinic and at the bench to try to move forward in epilepsy.
Thanks, Anne. I think that it's always wonderful to hear what you're up to as you lead the way forward for us to all be thinking about what we could be doing. And I think you're so right that culture change is what we've got to start with. And that's on every level, right? We're all very siloed. And how do we kind of bring everybody together? And especially around data, there's no question that's a critical part of the equation. Eric, you're up next. We're so glad that you're joining us and that you look like you are relaxed. You are not in a stuffy office like all of us. Enjoying your time, I hope.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you for inviting me. And again, I second everything that Vicki and Anne said, though I am sitting in my backyard because I had to go to my daughter's cross country meet and just barely made it back for this. So good time. But you know, I think we all learned a lot from the process of this Curing the Epilepsies meeting, and you know, not just benchmarking kind of what's been done, but thinking about where it needs to go. And now that I'm the co-chair of the benchmark committee for AES moving forward, you know, we want to continue to do this, and we have some new ideas. One, I'll actually have another co-chair who is Laurie Isom. I think many of you know who Laurie Isom is. One of the world's experts in some sodium channel biology and doing fabulous work in a number of different epilepsies. And that, you know, we're going to have more partners from the NINDS. So it won't just be Vicky, even though Vicky's truly amazing, but we're very happy to be having many of her colleagues who are really interested in being more intricately tied to the benchmarks to be doing this. And then obviously, of course, continuing to include the ELC and the ELC members in all this discussions. And one of the things that we hope to do over the next 5 years before the next Curing the Epilepsies meeting is have at the AES kind of a session where we pick each benchmark and kind of go into a little bit more detail than we did at the Curing the Epilepsies meeting at kind of where the science is, but also where the science needs to go and how can we get there. And asking those questions for each of the different benchmarks to kind of, you know, not just do this every 5 years or every 7 years, but every year take a deep dive into one of these issues. And of course, AES is taking a deep dive into the science. And, you know, there's lots of great science being presented, both basic science and clinical science, but taking a step back from the details of that science and thinking about kind of directionality of it and kind of where we need to go. And, you know, all these issues that Anne has raised, you know, think about those in perspective of each of the benchmarks and the training for them and data sharing and collaboration and novel collaborations and how as a field we can move that forward with, you know, NINDS and AES and the ELC all kind of yearly getting together to think about one of the specific benchmarks. So, you know, I really do think that this year's Curing the Epilepsies meeting really kind of is pushing this forward in a really positive direction. And I think with, you know, the amazing enthusiasm of all of the DEE Connections members and the REN members who, you know, obviously you all want things to happen yesterday. And, you know, I think as a clinician scientist and researcher, you know, we hear you loud and clear. And we hope that the benchmarks committee can take what we know and figure out where we're at and how we can move that forward. So I think this was a great beginning of what's going to be an ongoing conversation. So with that, I will, you know, just again, thank you for having me. And I agree with everything Vicki and Ann said, and you know, let the next person chime in.
Thanks, Eric. No, I think it's you bring a lot of great points up, and I think, you know, broadening that expertise and it does feel like we're at a bit of a tipping point, and so we're thrilled to have you in a leadership role helping to guide that discussion moving forward. All right, Laura.
Great. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many familiar names on the participants list. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Hopefully you can see those.
You're good.
Okay. So it is my pleasure to be here with so many wonderful colleagues and people who have become really dear friends in the time working on this conference. I'm going to be talking about the patient advocate perspective coming out of the conference. And I want to make the point that from the start, patient advocates played a very important role in this conference, from the initial stages of development and review of the benchmarks through partnering alongside the researchers and clinicians to discuss the advances in research and the critical next steps to transform epilepsy research to improved patient outcomes. The advocate role has really evolved over the last 2 decades of this conference series. And in 2021, it represented an even greater opportunity to have our voices at the table. And that was truly amazing and deeply appreciated. And following the conference, a group of advocates convened to describe the key takeaways, which were published alongside the editorial written by the conference stewards. But I want to note that, in coming out of the conference, it was clear that much progress has been made in understanding and treating the epilepsies. And we applaud the advancements and all of those researchers and clinicians and our industry partners who have worked so diligently to make this happen. We are really excited by the opportunities that have been identified as ways to move the field forward. And it's wonderful to hear what's happening and our ability to revisit this more frequently, both through yearly sessions and shortening the interval between the time of the next conference, as well as engagement of young scientists. But we also recognize that there are areas where deeper investment is needed. In the editorial that the advocates wrote, we called out some of the transformative opportunities that we observed, and that includes more seamless integration of research advances with the goal of improving patient care through a more rapid and iterative process. It's so essential to use the knowledge we have today to improve the lives of those who are impacted by epilepsy as soon as possible. It also requires ensuring inclusion of all people with epilepsy so that all have an opportunity for rapid diagnosis and treatment. It also seems clear that really putting a focus on measuring and tracking patient outcomes and relating this back to the research is a critical step in ensuring that our shared efforts to improve patient outcomes are truly making a difference. This may take strengthening of specific areas that we've not talked, well, we talked about a little bit today, such as implementation science and the science around healthcare delivery. And these are areas we need to continue to foster and grow. Finally, we need to ensure a detailed understanding of the burden of epilepsy, the burden to those impacted, including family members, and the tragedy of mortality. These topics are key to raising even greater awareness of the impact of epilepsy within the US. We recognize that these are not simple goals and will take time, but there are some immediate actions that have already been touched on, which is wonderful. It's great to see us coming together as a community to have our shared voice. We need to make sure that the patient voice is included in all aspects of research planning. There are groups out there that ensure that the patient voice is included in the review process and implementation, not necessarily doing the science itself, but really having a voice about what our key concerns are as patient and patient families to make sure that the most critical research is being touched on. And it's wonderful to see the partnering that's occurring across the epilepsy community. We need to do this. We need to deepen and extend these conversations. And it's wonderful to hear that that's going to be happening through more regular meetings at the AES. And again, revisiting the benchmarks and the conferences more frequently. This is, it's a delight to hear this. And it's, all because of the hard work that's happened in the last couple of years to really show the value of what's being done, but also the gaps that we need to address. Finally, the advocates also suggested bringing these efforts together as a call to action to bring the research and the implementation together in an articulated, comprehensive, and monitored national plan to address epilepsy, enabled by these expanded partnerships with a goal of enabling more rapid translation of research to better health outcomes, and that this is really an imperative. But how do we do this? What can be done now? I know as patient advocates, we all want it, as Eric said yesterday. It's so critical to the lives that we love, and for people who are directly impacted, we need to be doing things now. So how can you contribute more directly and immediately? These are just some ideas that we've come up with that resonate, I think, with some of the topics already. But I'm sure that there are other ideas. So if they're coming to mind, please do put them in the chat. I think this group would love to hear different ideas. For the advocacy groups and the professional science society leaders, we would hope that you would make creation of a comprehensive national plan to address epilepsy and organizational imperative. Sharing this opportunity with your advisory groups and board for input on ways that you might consider contributing. Big or small, it all matters. All of our voices matter. And as our voices need to come together, we need to build that community and our interdependency. We all have separate missions, we know that, but we need to come together on this key areas with shared messaging and create that framework for change in all collaborative efforts. We're really excited that the Epilepsy Leadership Council is taking on this landscaping effort to understand from the public health perspective and other areas that were addressed by the Institute of Medicine report on epilepsy, what's happened and where do we need to go as part of building that plan. And there will be other transformative initiatives that come up. So please do stay aware, be engaged, and share your voice. For patients and caregivers, share your story about the urgency for effective treatments and improved quality of life. We know that it can be difficult to talk about epilepsy. We know it's difficult to find time to share the challenges of a loved one, even sometimes with our own families. But it's so important for really spreading awareness and then cultivating relationships with local and national political representatives. If you have the opportunity, and I know this is scary, but once you do it, it's not so bad to walk into your representative's office and say, I have a problem and I want to discuss this with you. This is my loved one and how they're being impacted, and that we need to come together and we need their support to improve the lives of those with epilepsy. We need to increase federal and state funding for epilepsy research and translation to improved care. And for our researchers, clinicians, and industry partners, we know that you care deeply about the patients and our loved ones. We know that you invest a lot of time and energy in understanding patients and family concerns. Continue to do that. Let's continue to discuss the meaningful improvements that are needed for quality of life and what it means to a family or somebody impacted by epilepsy. You can do this by engaging and learning from patient advocacy groups. The Rare Epilepsy Network is a wonderful place to start, as are the other groups like Cure Epilepsy and EF, to find ways to learn and have patients to speak with. We know we're speaking to the choir here, but as you engage with younger people, we certainly want to be a resource for those junior trainees. And for physicians, if you have the opportunity to join an epilepsy learning healthcare system, do that. There are 2 learning healthcare systems now, and there are great opportunities to learn from patients and improve their care and quality of life. And together, we hope to leverage our own perspectives and expertise and bring those together to drive forward to advance the knowledge and delivery of care to those with epilepsy. And indeed, one day, come up with those very precious and important cures. So with that, I'll turn it back over and hope to have a great discussion.
Laura, thank you for those really tangible ways that we can all start to think about a role that we can play here in advancing our progress towards actually finding some cures. So I'm going to invite everybody to come back on camera. In addition to our presenters, we have Eileen Penn-Miller, Jayetta Hecker, and Brandy Fierman joining us to bring in their perspectives and help us think through ways that we can all be moving the needle forward and really taking advantage of this kind of the inflection point where it really seems like we are. So Eileen, Jayetta, Brandy, did you guys have anything that came up for you as you were listening that you want to chime in or kind of bang into our heads a little harder?
I'm
I
happy
can
to start. Well,
Oh, Anna, go
go
ahead.
on, Brandy.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say congratulations to everybody who's on the screen for all of the hard work that you put into Caring the Epilepsies conference and all of the associated activities. It was tremendous, and I think it's really set the stage for some important things happening to come. I am really excited about where we are. I think that the incredible amount of investment that has gone into basic science over the last couple decades, the emphasis now on translation and how we can't allow things to hit this valley of death. We have to make sure that we're making those handoffs and getting things to clinical testing has really put us into the position to talk about cures, which is phenomenal. That's a new terminology when we're talking about pragmatic, real things that can impact people's lives. That's new for us. And I think the point that I wanted to make is, I've had the privilege of now being able to step out and learn kind of a whole other area of the system, which is our public health system for epilepsy. How do we support the transition of the new things that are coming out of research, that are coming out of those exciting clinical trials? How do we make sure that they get to the people who need them and that they get there in an equitable way so that we are allowing everybody who needs these therapies to get access to them? And I think one of the things that we ought to think about is, there's a quote that is something like, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And if we think about our healthcare system and our healthcare delivery system today, we all know what some of those problems are: access to care, health inequities, all of these issues. People taking 20 years to get a surgical evaluation when they're excellent candidates for surgery. That's just one example. And I think that when we look at the history of epilepsy therapies, we're at another inflection point. Laurie used that term and I love it. I think that when we were, struggling to get new treatments, new medical treatments for epilepsy, there was a change in the system. NINDS put in place the anticonvulsant screening program. And that, in part, there were lots of other changes happening, but in part that helped to change the system. And what came out of that was a really dynamic, vibrant investment in new drug development for epilepsy. That changed the outcome. And I think that we're at the same kind of point today. We have to figure out, how do we change our system so that we deliver better outcomes to people? We've got wonderful basic science coming forward, wonderful things coming to clinical trials. Let's figure out how we accelerate all of that and then make sure that those effective treatments and cures get to the people who need them.
Jada, you were raring to go.
Hi. Well, I'm so taken, Brandy, so often about the clarity with which you articulate the urgency and the focus that's really needed. But I guess it was exciting. Who was it? Anne saying, we hadn't all been together. We used to meet all the time in preparation for many months, if not years. It was years. It's just so exciting to hear the energy and the vision from the diverse perspectives here. Vicki, I have to say, it's really exciting, the work you presented about thinking about that translation from the basic to the translation to the clinical to people's lives. I mean, that's just so exciting to hear about that. And Anne, I loved what you said in terms of the data sharing or the community, the way you work with Eric and you exchange data is the exception rather than the rule. And it's things like that that really have to become the rule. So, the innovators, the people who know it has to be better, we can do better, and you jury rig it to make it better. We need to do that on the system scale. That is, I think, exactly what Brandy was talking about. And Eric, it was really wonderful how you emphasized that this is really a different moment of really pushing a program in a positive direction as a community. and that it's not, well, this is what I'm going to do, I'll see you in 5 years, or this is what I'm going to do, but to sustain the sense of community that we had working together about what it's going to really take to put us on a path to not just great research, exciting, promising research, but improving lives. And Laura, you brought it home. It's been hit home for you, the cost and the frustration of a lifetime. And we really appreciate the clarity of the actions that you take or that you articulate. But what made me think about that is, you know, I think I know most everyone on the call, we're preaching to the choir. In many ways, the people that are here, you know, the group of us speaking, the whole audience are people who get it, that something has to change. Keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same result. And the challenge here is really how we engage, how we inspire, how we create the movement that they got for cancer reform, for AIDS. We have to start speaking in the unified way where we began to and work so well for the conference on an ongoing basis to really move the needle and bring the promise, as you were saying, Brandy, not just to a few, but to everyone. And there's lots of component challenges there. And, you know, the view of the advocates when we pulled our story together, that's why you need a plan. There's 20 different pieces. There's lots of pieces that have to change. And we need a plan to integrate it, to coordinate it, and to keep it on track. So we're really excited, and it's fun to hear the fresh thinking and the bold thinking that everyone put on the table.
Yeah, we've got a lot of shouts in agreement here about equity and access, which I think we're all grappling with now, but that's got to be front and center. So Eileen, I want to give you a chance to chime in.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for participating and for your remarks. I want to just follow up on something Jayetta said, and I want to plan a challenge to our community. And I think that you know, one of the best things that we as a community can be thinking about is how do we unite around a message, and perhaps it's something like Cure Epilepsy Now, something that, you know, is easy for all of us, irrespective of our lens. You know, to buy into. Cure the epilepsies now. That's what this community is interested in. And I also want to put forward a challenge to our community that we figure out a central repository, because I'm super excited to hear about all of the initiatives that are taking place, whether it's, you know, NINDS or AES or within ELC. But I just worry that if we get too far down the line and we don't create a repository, a place under an umbrella of a message where we sort of all can share and can exchange and can you know, find opportunities to partner and to elaborate, we'll go too far down the road, and you know, we'll sort of not meet the challenge that I think in the charge that Anne put out for us at the very beginning, which is to find those partnerships and those collaborations. So I hope that as a community, we can come up with a mantra, and we can come up with a space where we can have full transparency about all of these very promising and very exciting opportunities, and be able to use that to leverage not just those of us that are already, you know, sort of drinking it, that are here, but begin to build a place for other people that want to engage, to know, to understand the history and the opportunities ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Jada.
No, I was just drinking the Kool-Aid.
I think central to, I mean, what we all know is critical is data, right? And finding that central repository for places where we can learn from a population, you know, have an N of 10,000 instead of talking about an N of 12 here and 20 there and 50 there. And that's something that we continue to look for and preach. And I know everybody here and Eric and you guys leading the path, you know, clinician researchers, I think, are some of the most innovative folks in in this space thinking about these kind of solutions and enacting them. And that's why we keep calling you guys to work with you, because you guys are, so that's really exciting. And we'd love to hear more about that and how we can, build that as a model for, ongoing expansion. Anyone have any other thoughts they want to chime in here? I think this is, we titled this, "What Can You Do?" Right? And I think that might have pulled some people in. And I think we began that conversation today. Laura had a really fantastic slide that we will post that helps us all think about what we can bring to the table. And, I think everybody here, like we said, is drinking the Kool-Aid. We all know that time is brain. We know that we're losing too much of both. And the time is now to come together. I think I see our friend Sally Schaefer is on today as SUDEP Action Day. We need to be aware that there's a cost, right, to waiting, and that coming together and finding ways of really aligning our priorities, because we all have the same priority. Our end goals are the same, right? We want to improve the life, quality of life and outcomes for those living with epilepsy. So I think this was an incredible conversation. I love working with all of you and talking with all of you. And every time I do, I get really jazzed up and excited about what we can do and what we will do. And I think this is the inflection point. On the horizon are really exciting things. Eric, I remember your quote from the meeting that says we've made incredible progress, right? I mean, there has been in epilepsy research and discovery, but the prognosis, treatment, and outcomes are lagging. And that's what is motivating us all to find these ways of coming together and finding a unified voice. And I think that, this is just the beginning of the conversation. I hope that we will all continue to stay motivated. And, I think that what you shared at the end there of your remarks, Eileen, is really incredibly important, right? How do we have this shared message that gets out there? And I think that, there's a lot of people thinking about this and talking about this and wanting to find more ways of spreading the word. And I think that that's something that we'll certainly continue talking about. And we hope that you'll be a part of, contributing to, and we'll continue the discussion. So in moving forward, I think, we would love to hear more about what all of you are working on. We'll put out ways of communicating that and asking you to share what you're working on that we can broadcast and highlight promising practices. Staying inspired. I think that we all come to these meetings and we get so excited and feel like time is ripe, we can do it. And I think then we all get back into the grind of our work. But, I think staying inspired, we've had a couple of really incredible conversations with Dan Lowenstein, with Ann Berg and Stu Goldman, who made the comparison between pediatric cancer and epilepsy and how we've just, we're decades and decades behind, and as a model that we could potentially look to. And in the interim, I think, one of the things that Laura kind of touched on is, let's start thinking about what we can do, right? Institutions, can you start putting this on your agenda? What role do we play in curing the epilepsies? What strengths do we bring to the table? Because it's going to take all of us in this fight to really to get closer to where we need to be. And then, of course, stay tuned. All of these folks on here are thought leaders who are pushing the envelope. Follow them, listen to what they're saying, engage them in conversation in different platforms. DEE-P is here to stay in terms of having these conversations. We will continue to put out any information that we're finding. We'd love to share stories from all of you. If you want to share what you're working on. And Jayetta, I'll pass it over to you for a second to share some final thoughts. Did you have some thoughts? I saw your hand went up. Oh, you're muted. Oh, you're muted, Jayetta.
Why don't we just have Eileen tell folks about the Chris Austin session at AES?
Yeah, thank you. And we'll be sure to post that. So Chris Austin, who many of you may know, was the former director of NCATS and just a really inspirational thinker. And for those of you that have seen him talk, he's been saying for years now that particularly in the rare diseases, we're not going to get there one disease at a time. We just don't have the resources. So, you know, as many of us who have been personally impacted by this disease, I would never say that we are lucky, but we are lucky in the sense that we have a disease that sort of falls under an umbrella. And I think he's going to be giving a talk on Tuesday during the translational symposium at AES. I hope everybody will make an effort to come. In addition to him, we have 3 really incredible panelists who are going to be giving those concrete examples of how translation has taken place in development, in drug development, in product development, and in the clinic. And hopefully he will be part of this, you know, inspiration to help us really imagine how we as a community can further push for translation faster and utilize resources both with our friends at NINDS, but beyond as well across all of NIH and outside too.
Yeah, and that session is going to be available streaming as well for anybody who's not going to actually make it to AES. So we will put that link up on our website for folks to find that talk when we post this webinar within the next week. So be on the lookout. So thank you all for being a part of this discussion. As I mentioned, we love getting together with all of you and dreaming big and thinking about how we reach our goal together. So, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's really, you know, you keep us motivated and keep pushing us, and we're here together working on this, and we'll get there as long as we keep, you know, it's very corny, but you know, together, holding hands and walking into the sunset as we solve these big problems together, right? So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Take care. We'll see you at the next Curing the Epilepsy soon.
Thank you, Gabby.
Bye, everyone.